Well, I'm a huge proponent of tillage, and I think it is much vilified by people that aren't thinking deeply enough about how soil actually works, and it is a tool that must be managed appropriately, and we try to rotate our tillage, much like we rotate our crops. And it's very important to not get in a rut, literally and figuratively, of the tools that are used. And the example you brought up, within our crop rotation, we have competitive and less competitive crops. And in order to grow those crops that are less naturally competitive with weeds or with species that manifest, you have to think about, well, how do we make that possible?
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Doug Crabtree of Vilicus Farms in Montana, a dryland grain farm where conservation tillage, long, diverse rotations, and biodiversity on the farm are important tools that are helping Doug and his wife Anna find success. I interviewed Doug in the summer of 2021 during a very dry season, and we discussed how they remained solvent during the drought in spite of programs like federal crop insurance that requires all the wrong practices. I'm happy today to get the opportunity to speak with Doug Crabtree at Vilicus Farms in northern Montana. Hi, Doug.
Hello.
Tell us a little bit about Velikas and what you grow and at what scale and what you all are busy doing these days.
I'll try that in reverse. We are preparing for winterizing machines and trying to wrap up the year-end projects. We made a lot of hay this year, which was totally not something we normally do, I guess. We had a lot of crop failure, actually, and a few thousand acres of grain that didn't make heads, and we had the opportunity to turn that into hay, which is in great demand since not much of that grew this year either. So anyhow, that's a big project that we're working on, coming to fruition.
So tell folks who don't understand why you wouldn't get a crop, what happened this year?
Well, we farm in a near desert to begin with. Our normal, if there is any such thing anymore, precipitation is 11 inches annually. This year it was 4, and also we had unprecedented heat early in the growing season when our crops are trying to make seeds and fill heads, and so they largely didn't. So just coming to grips with climate change and all of the impacts therefrom, and how that manifests this year.
4 inches. When did those 4 inches fall?
About half after harvest, so that was not helpful either. I think in the growing season we had less than 3, so it's it's hard to grow things under those conditions. But
let's talk a little bit about how you try to conserve water on your farm through some of your practices and how your farm fared through this drought compared to other farmers around you who might not be doing those practices.
Yeah, I don't want to give the mistaken impression that we've found any kind of secret or answer. If it rains or the total precipitation is less than 5 or 6 inches, there's really not much we can do to make that work. So we're in a brittle environment, I guess is a way to put it. But to answer your question more directly, we focus most of our efforts on building soil and enhancing soil health. And in the long run, I'm confident that will make the best of whatever it is that we have to work with. But in the short term, building soil is a generational endeavor, and trying to survive in the short term is, I'm not sure we know how to do that yet. So, that's a constant tension, because we're trying to do things that are beneficial in the long run, but we still have to pay bills every year, and it's, I guess, it's a real challenge.
Let's talk about some of those things that you're doing. First of all, what crops are you growing, and how many acres of each?
Yeah, we're managing. I'm always going to answer your questions in reverse, I guess, but we're managing 12,800 and something acres in total. About 72% of that is in annual crop production, the balance devoted to longer term conservation, field borders and pollinator habitat and various other conservation practices. In the portion that we crop, we grow a 7-year rotation and grow 15 to 20 different individual species at any given year. Small grains and pulse crops and broadleaves and oilseeds are sort of the categories that we focus on. Within those categories, we have many different options, and that sort of the specifics are determined each year based on market and also some agronomic concerns. But every year it turns out to be somewhere between 15 and 20 crops in individual species that we grow.
That's an amazing level of diversity. How do you even figure out how to market that many things?
Well, we kind of do that in reverse to what most people do, I guess, which is bizarre to me. I've never understood why you would grow something, put it in the bin, and then hope you can sell it. But we endeavor, and for the most part, 80+% of our acres are sold before we buy the seed, let alone put it in the ground. So that's the season we're entering here, is our marketing season, where we work with our buyers that we already know and invite others and negotiate and try to come to terms to where our acres are allocated before we get to seeding.
Okay, and who are some of those, where would people end up eating something and it could be your crop? Where does it go?
Well, we have a diversity of buyers. And I don't have my list in front of me, so bear with me, but at least over the years, we've dealt with a wide spectrum of partners, anything from, and I hesitate to name names, but I'll do it for purpose of illustration, from General Mills, who we've sold to and worked with a number of times over the years, to Timeless Seeds, which is a much smaller, as you might imagine, processor locally here in Montana. And they have a line of heirloom and specialty grain and pulse crops. And we've sold primarily lentils, but also emmer, more recently to Timeless. And so that's kind of our spectrum. We're also anxious to move into more direct marketing or value added, where we're trying to develop our capacity to clean and bag and just be able to do smaller quantities here, so that we can work more directly with even a greater number of buyers.
Yeah, I imagine you'll be really good at direct farming, because your farm story is so appealing to customers. They want to support that kind of farm story, and also how many apprentices you have, all the things that you do on your farm too. I imagine direct marketing will go really well for you. Do you feel like you have fair prices before you said you already have places that you sell? Are you working with brokers sometimes? Do they tell you the price you're going to get before it goes into the ground? Is this a fair system for the most part?
Well, we try to be as direct as possible, and eliminate, or at least avoid, as many intermediaries as we can. every time you put another step in the chain or link in the chain, and it seems like all of those intermediaries again take their costs out regardless, and to me that just detracts directly from what's left for the farm. And so I'm going to say we don't do it. We haven't done it, but we do consciously try to avoid and shorten those chains. Regardless of the size of the buyer or the processor, the closer we can get to them, the better it is for both of us.
Right. But are those prices usually agreed ahead of time, or do you find out kind of this winter what you're going to get?
Oh, no. As I said, I can't fathom how people market that way, because I can't bear the risk, and we do everything we can to have that determined far ahead of time, as I said, before we buy the seed, let alone before we put it in the ground. And we also have and try to have more long-term contracts where we're working on 3, 5+ year arrangements where those terms are being set well ahead of time, and that is our goal is to be in as long a term as possible, 5 to 10 year arrangements with terms preset, and just take some of that risk away.
Are these things that you're talking about possible for, I know you said your family farm is from Ohio. What were they growing there? And, is the usual corn and soy, even in organic, are they not getting to experience kind of that same marketing privilege to know something is sold ahead of time and at a certain price?
Wow. Well, that's really taking me back into a different ecosystem and all, but I don't know. It's hard for me to speculate, Lindsay, on what will work somewhere else or for someone else. But here, I guess we work really hard on trying to build relationships and market. And frankly, if people aren't of the same mindset and willing to be, to commit themselves, we just find that we don't need to work with those sort of entities. At least so far for us, and I'm not saying it's not a challenge, but at least to this point in the organic marketplace, we've been able to say, if you don't want to kind of meet our terms or negotiate with us in that way, there are others who will. And some of it is being willing to grow things that others won't grow, being open to diversity and all that brings, both from crops and from buyers. And long ago, I learned that one of the secrets is being willing to do things others won't. If everybody wants to grow wheat, we'll grow Immer and Kamut. If everybody wants to grow peas, we grow specialty lentils. But the more you can do to, the more we do to differentiate and be able to be willing to take on specialty, more distinct, I guess, is how I like to think of it.
Yeah, that's good advice. I remember visiting in Europe when we first got started with the Real Organic Project, and we were looking at other add-on labels because they've been going on since the beginning of the European Union when they started defining organic. All the kind of separate certification agencies like we had here, they just kept keeping their own kind of add-on label in their forms of continuous improvement. And what was really big there when I visited a few years ago was this concept of fair, which in the US I don't think has really taken off. And what it meant in Europe was not necessarily fair pay to the workers, but also fair pay to the farmers and fair contracts and long-term contracts. And there was really an awareness from the eaters to support the businesses that were actually giving farmers fair contracts. I just feel like we have so far to go here in the US in terms of that awareness on the eaters' end and what farmers are going through in terms of getting fair contracts and fair prices for what they grow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. we have a lot to learn, and not surprisingly, we're a much younger and perhaps less evolved society as a whole. And I am always, whether we're talking about farm policy or cultural aspects, I think we sacrifice so much in the name of independence that we leave behind a lot of opportunity for community and mutual support on that altar. But man, that's a whole can of worms, huh?
Yeah, no, I know you definitely live that on your farm, and I want to dive into that too. But I hope you can remember, you're saying, oh, that was too long ago, but I'm curious why you didn't stay at your family's farm in Ohio. Am I right that you did farm there for a little while, and why Montana?
Yeah, well, I mean, those are where my roots come from, but I guess there are a lot of reasons, but primarily there just wasn't an opportunity. I grew up in what was commonly referred to as the farm crisis years in the 1980s, and the farm that I grew up on no longer exists and ceased to exist at that time. So I didn't have one to return to. And my view or understanding of kind of ag economics at the micro scale was, it just didn't make any sense. What it costs to buy or even lease land and the opportunities to do it at whatever cost, just I could never sharpen my pencil enough to see how that made any sense, and sort of followed the age-old paradigm of continuing to move west in search of opportunity. And so we went to where the land was, and where land was then and still is now available at a price point that you can have some possibility of just being economically viable. And I still don't see how that's possible. Further east, further more populated areas, that it just there's too much competition, and I don't know how to tell people to make it work, because I don't know how it can.
So you lost your family farm's land in the 1980s, even though you wanted to continue farming it, or there were family members that wanted to continue farming it?
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way. Had that opportunity been there, I'm sure I would have kept banging my head against it. But that business dissolved in essence, and was no longer available to us. And this is before Anna and I even met. But I pursued an education and continued looking for opportunities in my younger years, and seemed to move us further west. And I'm really glad of it. I'm my roots now are pretty firmly here, and I would encourage anyone to. I think we have a tendency in agriculture to be fixated on the where we are versus. I always tell people when I talk to them, go to where the opportunity is, and don't feel like you are limited by geography, but look at where nature is telling you to be.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I'm harping on the question because I know that so much of what happened in the 80s in kind of conventional agriculture is starting to repeat itself in organic now. And I'm wondering if there's a way to learn, from the lessons of what we, can we prevent the loss of organic acreage in that area if we can somehow, figure out how not to repeat those mistakes and prevent all the consolidation that happened, and the prices that were just below the cost of production. Because there was this beautiful time, I think, for, maybe 20 years where organic farmers were really making a living there, and it's starting to disappear. And, I'm curious if you have an opinion why there aren't more organic acres right now. I know there's a lot of grain fraud, but, is that the only reason, in your opinion, why there's not organic acres more?
Oh, wow. let me try to unpack that. I do have thoughts. I think it's so much bigger than economics, and I have come to believe and have espoused that the other system, which I refer to what is commonly miscategorized as conventional farming or agriculture, is well, it's different, and I would argue it's much simpler and, in ways easier. And for the most part, if people believe it's acceptable to farm that way, they will. And organic is, there are attractive price premiums that get perhaps the first attention and make it possible for people to envision how to farm in a more enlightened way. But it's got to be so much more than that. You really have to commit yourself to farming organically. And until you do, and unless you do, it absolutely will not work. And you sort of have to change your mind first. And then once you understand and believe, then you find a way to make it work. And I guess one could argue it's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but I don't know if it's that much different than other endeavors in life. That first you have to change your mind, and that is, the longer I practice this, the more obvious that is to me. That it's just, you can't, the economics are not going to pull us. We have to change first and then find ways to make the economics work.
Could you talk a little bit about some of those things that you've learned and you're implementing on your farm now? I mean, I know you mentioned the incredibly long rotation. What are you thinking about? We'll start there, in terms of your rotation. How much goes into that thought process, and why 7 years?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't think that's a magic number, first of all. That's just what we've come to that seems to be the current iteration of how to manifest diversity. But, principles, I mean, first and foremost, I am ever more convinced that diversity in all of its manifestations is the strongest tool we have. And anything we can do as growers to enhance and highlight and increase the amount of diversity we're able to manifest, that is our best way of emulating nature. And whenever we look at natural systems, the further and the deeper we look, the more diversity we uncover. And we have to be about that, and we have to work to enhance that in our agricultural systems. And that's what we're trying to do. Our latest manifestation is to incorporate livestock and grazing into our cropping systems. And that's just, already we're seeing so many more opportunities because of that. And it's just fitting the pieces together. It's a complex puzzle and a challenge to our human abilities to understand and put in place. But you ask about crop rotation, and that is, that's a thesis in itself, and it was mine. I spent years studying crop rotations and how that manifests, and learning from other organic farmers, and then putting pieces of what I learned to educate myself, and then to develop the system we're working with now. But it's an annual cropping system. The rotation is the manifestation of the diversity that we're trying to hone. And we work with, I think I started to explain earlier, but we work with crop types rather than specific species, and we rotate heavy feeding and light feeding grains with pulses, both harvested and as green manures, and also broadleafs and oilseed crops, which are another family. So you have 2 grains, a harvested pulse, a green manure, and a broadleaf year. And you add that up, you get 7 years that we rotate. And then within each of those categories, there may be 2 or 3 or more different specific species that we're able to use in that year or that category. And that's the current system, I guess. And it's hard to explain without charts and pictures, both of which make it a lot more evident.
I know one of the things that you probably think about is bare soils in the winter. What are some of the things that you do to make sure your soils are protected? You're farming pretty far north, and there's probably not a lot of time in the season to get things, get a crop out and then get a cover crop in. So how do you kind of work around that short season?
Yeah, for the United States, we're pretty far north. We farm on the Canadian border and up to 16 miles south from there. But I always have to remind myself and others that there's a whole other nation that goes many hundreds of miles further north, and a lot of very creative and intelligent farmers making that work.
In which case, you're a Southerner.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. They think of us as those people to the south. But nonetheless, your point is well taken. A short season and a cool season are what we have in our nature, and we're also very dry. We're a dry. We're a cold desert. Is one way to think of the ecosystem we're working in, and we don't harvest every year. Our system is designed. We're surrounded by the dominant system here is a crop fallow, which means they grow and harvest a crop one year and then simply leave it bare the next year, and that is done to ostensibly to preserve moisture and use 2 years worth of moisture for each year of harvest. We, of course, are trying to be a little more creative in that, but we are able to harvest, or we endeavor to harvest in our 7-year rotation 4 of those years, and have one that's a flex year and 2 others that are always designed as what we call green manures, where we seed a crop and then terminate it and turn it back into the soil. And that is, for soil building primarily, but also the moisture limitation is a constant thing that we have to manage for here. So that is a principle in our system design.
Are you at all, I know there's a lot of talk right now for carbon credits because of climate change and farming practices that could be rewarded. Some of these ecosystem services that are, that are actually putting carbon back into the soils. A lot of them are no-till with herbicides, and these chemical farmers are actually seeing huge increases in their organic matter over time with no-till herbicide, because their organic matter is so low, just kind of because of years of abuse. And so they can switch over and then get these carbon credits. Kind of what I imagine that your organic matter it's kind of slowly maintained from your practices over time and your thoughtful rotations. So how do we kind of work around the organic farmers that have been, sequestering carbon for decades, but aren't really going to see these kind of quick increases with a no-till herbicide switch, for example? What are some of your concerns here with these carbon credits that might be going to the wrong type of farming?
Oh, wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I guess I'll start with what is the most obvious to me, that all organic matter is not created equal or does not manifest equally. And the misconception that simply by stopping one practice, by stopping tillage, that you're suddenly building anything of value is sort of a bizarre concept to me, that how one could perceive to grow or build something simply by not doing I don't conceive it. But and then at a more in-depth look at it, we're surrounded by no-till practitioners, and I think I want to give them credit and think they're, hope that they're doing things for the right reasons. But it's just it's not a very, very, very deep or thoughtful approach to agriculture. But back to the soil, which is where we all need to be focused. Just building litter and piling it on the surface is not a very thoughtful approach. And any reasonable measurement of that is, they're just not, they're not actually feeding biology, and that system is, anything that gives that credit is just not looking deep enough, literally and figuratively.
So the measurements might be, too shallow. So that might be one concern, that they're not measuring carbon deep enough in the soil.
Yeah, I mean, what I have and am still trying to learn, that there's a vast difference between the active or sort of immediate organic matter and the more long-term or stable. And it's a biological process that takes crop residues and converts those over time into more stable organic matter. And the one is fluctuating and more. It's important in our system. We need that active, that turn into, turning those residues back into food for subsequent plants. But at the same time, if we're talking about carbon sequestration, building that into a pool of stable organic matter is a long-term process, and it requires feeding the soil and feeding the organisms that live within it and make it, rather than thinking of, what are we doing to feed any given crop. And if we build and manage a healthy soil, that will in turn over time manifest in the ability to grow any particular harvest and species of crop. But yeah, I'm very concerned that we're rewarding systems that there's no real credible evidence are actually contributing, and in fact are still mining from the soil. And that it's easy to take a measurement and claim that I've got all of this quote unquote organic matter, but it's not alive, and it's you can come back 6 weeks later or 3 days later and have a totally different number, depending on the depth at which you're sampling, or the time of year, and the moisture that's available. So it's so much of the devil is in the details of those programs, and we need a much more nuanced approach to look at systems that are over the long term building and enhancing soil health.
How can we do it better? What are some of those specific practices that we could be rewarding?
Well, I think there's plenty of evidence that it has to start with diversity, and there's no way that a system that is simple is ever going to be also sustainable. And so we need to be rewarding and looking at and encouraging increasing diversity over time. And a 1 or 2 or even 3 crop system is simply not ever going to be healthy, and it will have to require in order to maintain, even over the short term, a lot of off-farm inputs into it. And I would argue that in itself is an indicator. Any system that is requiring external props or inputs to make it work is inherently not sustainable and not healthy. And one of our goals is to work towards self-sufficiency and building a system that maintains itself. And I think the simplicity that human minds seem to gravitate towards is something we have to work really hard to counter. And we should build towards ever increasing complexity as nature does.
There's some insurance in that complexity, isn't there? You said you were able to get some hay this year, even though it rained all of maybe 2 inches, you said, during the season.
Well, that's part of our adaptation to climate change, is building resilience and being able to I don't want to suggest that is any kind of a sustainable approach either. What we're doing this year in kind of exporting that resource gives me pause, but it also is, we're trying to take advantage of an opportunity that we were given to make it work. And that's going to be a constant, I think, is just working with what you have and being flexible and adaptable.
Can you give some specific examples of where tillage is appropriate? I remember a social post that really informed me that you all made was right before, I believe it was flax. It made sense to actually till the soil pretty deep. You got rid of a lot of weeds, and it might have had to do with what came before it. Could you talk about some of the specific examples where tillage can be really useful?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of tillage, and I think it is much vilified by people that aren't thinking deeply enough about how soil actually works. And it is a tool that must be managed appropriately. And we try to rotate our tillage much like we rotate our crops, and it's very important to not get in a rut, literally and figuratively, of the tools that are used. And the example you brought up, within our crop rotation, we have competitive and less competitive crops. And in order to grow those crops that are less naturally competitive with weeds or with species that manifest, you have to think about, well, how do we make that possible for this crop that has benefits, both economic and agronomic, to survive and hopefully thrive? Well, part of as a manager, we have to create conditions that make that possible, and that's where the tillage rotation comes in. And if we are to grow those crops, one of the things we have to do is that is the place in the rotation where the more intensive tillage fits. And by moldboard plowing, we're able to bury the small seeded weeds, bury those seeds so that they don't manifest in that year or actually in the next 2 or 3 years. And it creates a time where we have not only enhanced the soil by providing a different impact to it, but we've also made it possible to grow another crop that adds to the diversity therein. And we certainly wouldn't advocate to do that frequently, but I also wouldn't advocate to do anything the same each year within the rotation. And it's we're still absolutely learning, but that is one thing that we have discovered, is that it is very important in our system, at least in our eco zone, to alter the the depth of tillage. And it's not proper to say that it's never right to till deeply or it's never right to till intensely, but you have to be very thoughtful about where that fits and to be sure that when you do create disturbance, that you're following it with appropriate seeding and making that work so that you keep the system healthy.
Are there specific things that you see in your region, which I imagine is incredibly delicate because of how little rain you get? Are there practices that you see that just shouldn't be happening? Is there a lot of tillage in the fall, or what would you like to see go?
Well, I'd like to see there be a lot more tillage. We have, and I don't mean in our system, but this ecosystem writ whole, we have eliminated that aspect and replaced it with a much more damaging chemical treatment. This perversion called chem fallow is now used at a huge scale, where you just time after time subject the soil to herbicides, the goal being to absolutely eliminate any living thing in and on that soil to purportedly preserve or conserve moisture. So, managing for one simple goal at the expense of the larger biology, and it just turns my stomach literally to see it done, and then to see its result. Just miles and miles and miles of brown when and where there should be life, and
it's very rare that I hear about the energy use or the water use in synthesizing these herbicides. So it's like we don't even look at the whole system either when we make these kind of simplified statements.
Yeah, I mean, there's no life cycle cost analysis. If there were any, it would quickly be evident that makes no sense. But it doesn't even take a very. All you have to do is look at the landscape, and it's so obvious that can't be healthy. You just see death. It's just not. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is known that it's changing the composition of life in the soil and greatly simplifying it.
If you're willing to think, all you've got to do is use the senses that we're all given and look there. And when you see these shades of gray and brown and just death manifest, and I mean, I don't want to say that we always have this beautiful abundance, but there are times, nature has its cycles, and to rain down intentional death and use all that energy to counteract what would otherwise be a live manifestation of biology, it just doesn't make any sense.
I think this point is so pertinent right now because I am seeing that there is a lot of money going behind those practices in an effort to, under the name of, climate mitigation. And I think it is so, it is taking us down the wrong path, and it's not going to get us out of our problem. So I really appreciate you talking about this because I think we're going down the wrong direction right now, and it's so important that we don't do that. We can't afford to do that. You're already seeing, in the last decade, I'm sure the drought hasn't gotten better. It's gotten much worse, and who knows where it'll be in the next 10 years. So it's so important we get this right. So I really appreciate you talking about it.
Well, thanks for giving us the audience.
I want to end kind of with something that a lot of farmers joke about that are cursed with this farmer gene. It's like a joke that it's an illness without a vaccine, and we're stuck doing it no matter what comes, and we go back the next year saying this is the year, everything's going to be perfect this year. I've learned all these mistakes and I'm changing things. Anyway, I'm curious, why do you farm? It is a beautiful way of life, and I know that there's a reason why you come back every year, so I'm hoping you'll share that with us.
Yeah, why? I have jokingly referred to it as an incurable disease. I think it's more of, I believe that farming is something that you are, and I think there are those of us that are farmers, and that we, whether it's our lineage or just it's a manifest in our personhood, that's what we were meant to do. That's what we were brought here to be. And I'm sure there are farmers that are not practicing it, and wish them the best. But I think as humans, one of our challenges is to find what we are, and then be about manifesting that. And I've been lucky to have identified that early on, that a farmer is what I am, and then you just don't have to worry about the whole, what am I going to be when I grow up? Well, that's what I'm going to be, because that's what I am.
You just have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is not easy.
And that's hard enough, right? But I really, I think I'm very blessed that I was able to realize that fairly early on in my growth and development. And in our apprentice program, we try to help others bring that out from themselves, and help vision, how to get there. Once you recognize that's what you are, how do you go about manifesting it?
It's why I do this work. I think there's so many farmers that don't make it, that try, and they work so hard, and there's just too many obstacles, and it's just too hard. What are some of the things that we can do that you've noticed, through your apprenticeship program, that can help them succeed?
Well, I don't know. I guess that's a really hard question. I think anything is hard, right? But once you decide and commit yourself to this endeavor, then it's the how. How do I make that work? And I think there's also a lot of misnomers saying, we have to make sacrifices. Well, what's a sacrifice? What do you derive satisfaction from? And there are basic needs we need to meet, of course. I don't want to take that away, but we're so wealthy as a culture that I'm getting awfully philosophical, and that's probably not where you're trying to get. But we want to give people that we want to help incubate in them. Once they've determined that they want to farm, we will help make that possible, and it is absolutely possible. But you have to commit yourself first and foremost, and if you're willing to do that, then we can definitely be part of the solution to making it possible for you.
Farmers that have found you are very lucky that you're there to kind of show them the way, help guide them, and figure out how to fulfill kind of a life's ambition. And I know that there's so much more we can do. I think it's really tragic to me how many young farmers give it a go and just aren't able to succeed. And for me, it's why I do this. We've got to change that.
Yep.
Because it's for the betterment of everybody, not just the person who gets to see a dream fulfilled, but for the ecosystem, the community that they're in, the good food that they make. It's just too important.
I believe with all my heart that this is the most important work on earth, that we are tending resources that are so valuable and necessary for not only for humans to survive, but for the earth and all of its species. And I just, there are so many things that are so trivial that people spend so much time and resource doing, and then I just see so much good that comes from being stewards. And how do we support more of us making that choice and being able to live out a life of stewardship? That's what we all come back to. And
I can see how important the kind of personal decisions that you've made in your life to help the next generation succeed and to farm responsibly yourself. I'm curious how important do you feel that policies are in addition to the personal work? How important is it that the policies change around that to support that work as well?
Well, we as a farm and I personally spend sometimes I think way too much time, but it is. And at some level, it's, policies are impediments that we have to work around, and we're trying to make them incrementally better. I think about crop insurance as, I often say that is the biggest impediment to good farming is the crop insurance that does so much to prop up poor farming. And, if we could wave a magic wand or had the power to change something overnight, that's where I would start, is just remove the subsidies that are given to doing the wrong things. And by far the biggest subsidies in our current system are in the realm of crop insurance. And then I hope that we can move some of that to actually incentivizing good things, get out of policies that we have to work around and get into policies that actually support beneficial practices and outcomes. And I don't want to say there aren't those, but at this point in our system, we're working very hard to minimize the incentives for bad. And you have to. I mean, you can't ignore that because it's such a huge factor in all that we do, and it could be so much better. And we're trying to be champions of that.
Why did you decide to sign up for the Real Organic Project?
I think it was largely. I'm very cautious about alternative labels because I absolutely believe that the organic label is the biggest opportunity that we have to let consumers vote with their dollars and citizens vote with their conscience, and to support good farming. And I think organic is still, with all of its challenges and flaws that we're working to try to make better, but that is still the overwhelmingly best opportunity we have. So I'm really cautious about splintering it. That said, we do feel that the Real Organic is a much more holistic segment, if you will, and we really want to lend our support to that being what organic really needs to be. And I see more and more, unfortunately, just perversions within organic, and whether that's hydroponic or confined animal systems, or on the food side, just organic products that are not don't fit my vision of what it should be, we'll say. And it seems like a larger and larger portion of the organic farming, the organic food is going in a direction that's troubling. And so the Real Organic to me, is just a manifestation of what we need it to be, and a very positive. Rather than saying not this, and this, we're saying yes, this. This is what we are and what we support.
I remember being told by Elliot Coleman that we don't stand a fighting chance, and he kind of joked about it, but you got to go down fighting. What's your take on it? Can we walk away knowing that, the program at some point, has listened to us and they've been able to kind of reel in where we went wrong, and the corporate takeover has gone away? Do you think we can do it?
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get focused on all that is wrong or bad or challenging, but I still absolutely believe that organic is we're still only 5% of the food system and 1% of the land, so we still have a lot of work to do, and that 1% or 5% encompasses all that is good, bad, and indifferent. So I'm really hopeful that we can minimize the infighting and all pull together to continue to, let's get that 5% to 50, and let's get that 1% to 20, and if we do that, we will have accomplished, and we will, when we do that, we will have been a real part of the success, whether we're talking about climate change or just making our food healthy and making our culture more encompassing. Organic is the answer to all of that, and it's the best and the most important thing we can do to make life and culture and just health manifest. And so, real organic is the best of the best.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for your time today, and I'll let you get back on the tractor or whatever you're doing today.
Thank you.
No,
thank you for what you do, and real organic is a big part of it, so we appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 79. Please join us next time when our guest is vegetable farmer Scott Park of Meridian, California, who also shares his thoughts on the benefits of thoughtful tillage and what he's learned through decades of experimental trials. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org and get the benefits of being a real friend, including our book club, where you can ask our favorite authors your questions. See you next time.